This October, two planets station retrograde in the same sign at the same time, Venus on October 3rd, Mercury 3 weeks later, both in Scorpio, both in a purring to reverse direction through the most psychologically intense sign in the zodiac, simultaneously. But instead of explaining what that combination actually means, your feed will fill with the same recycled warnings. Do not start new relationships. Do not buy electronics. Your ex is coming back. Hide until November. There is a 4,000-year-old story that describes exactly what this double transit is doing. Nobody warning you about October has ever mentioned it. You have heard the Venus retrograde advice. It circulates every 18 months when Venus appears to reverse direction in the sky. Do not get married. Do not change your appearance. Do not make major financial commitments. Old flames may reappear. You might suddenly find your partner less attractive or question a relationship you thought was solid. And above all, wait. Wait until Venus goes direct and resume your life. You have also heard the Mercury retrograde warnings, because those circulate 3 to 4 times every year. Do not sign contracts. Back up your files. Expect miscommunications. Technology will fail you. Travel plans will collapse. Put your life on hold for 3 weeks because the universe has decided to scramble your signals. Now imagine both of those sets of warnings landing in the same 3-week window, in the same zodiac sign, at the same time. That is what happens this October. And the response from social media will be exactly what you would expect. Double the warnings, double the anxiety, double the instructions to hide. But Venus, in every astrological tradition that ever studied it seriously, was never just about romance. Venus governs what you value. Relationships, yes, but also money, self-worth, beauty, pleasure, the choices you make about how to spend your time, your energy, and your resources. And Mercury was never just about technology glitches. Mercury governs communication, thought, and the exchange of ideas. When both of these planets appear to reverse direction at the same time, in the same sign, the ancient traditions did not see a double disaster. They saw a double audit, a reckoning with what you value and how honestly you have been expressing it. The real story starts with what Venus actually does in the sky, and what it does is unlike anything else in the solar system. Venus orbits the Sun in 225 days. Earth orbits in 365. The ratio between those two numbers is almost exactly 13 to 8. 13 Venus orbits fit inside 8 Earth years with astonishing precision, the difference being roughly 2 days over the entire 8-year span. That near-perfect mathematical relationship means that every 8 years Venus returns to almost the same position relative to Earth and the Sun. And during those 8 years, Venus and the Sun align from Earth's perspective exactly 5 times. Plot those 5 alignment points on a circle and connect them in order. You get a pentagram, a 5-pointed star. Plot the full orbital path Venus traces between those points as seen from Earth, and the lines curve into petals, 5 petals, radiating from a central point, forming a geometric rose. This is the literal orbital path of Venus mapped from our planet's perspective. You can reproduce it with any astronomical plotting software and watch the flower appear on your screen. It is called the Rose of Venus, and it has been visible in the night sky for as long as humans have been looking up. The connection between Venus and the rose reaches back at least to the Sumerians, around 2500 BCE, where the goddess Inanna, who was the planet Venus in Sumerian cosmology, was depicted with 5-pointed star symbols on cylinder seals. A seal dating to approximately that period shows Inanna with a pentagram, predating the Greek adoption of the symbol by 2,000 years. The planet drew the flower. The culture named the goddess. The symbol outlived both by millennia. The Sumerians were not alone in tracking Venus with near-obsessive precision. The Maya of Mesoamerica, separated from Mesopotamia by an ocean and several thousand years, independently developed a Venus tracking system of extraordinary sophistication. The Dresden Codex, a Mayan manuscript dating to roughly the 13th century but based on observations going back centuries earlier, contains Venus tables that predict the planet's appearances and disappearances with accuracy, rivaling modern computation. The Maya tracked Venus's full cycle, its appearance as morning star for roughly 260 days, its disappearance for about 50 days, its reappearance as evening star for another 260 days, and its second disappearance for about 8 days during retrograde. Their calendar system interlocked Venus cycles with solar and lunar cycles into a structure that governed agriculture, warfare, and ritual. Venus was not decoration in Mayan culture. It was infrastructure, the fact that civilizations on opposite sides of the planet with no contact between them independently built their calendars around the same planetary pattern tells you something about how conspicuous Venus's behavior is. You do not need a telescope to track it. You need clear skies, patience, and a willingness to pay attention. Venus is the third brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon. Its disappearance during retrograde is visible, dramatic, and unmistakable to anyone watching. Within each 18-month Venus cycle, the retrograde period lasts roughly 40 days, and during this retrograde, Venus passes between Earth and the Sun, and for approximately 8 days at the midpoint, it vanishes from view entirely. It drops below the horizon line, lost in the sun's glare, invisible from Earth. Then it reappears on the other side, transitioning from evening star to morning star. The brightest light in the night sky goes dark, then comes back. The ancients did not have the orbital mechanics to explain this disappearance. What they saw was their brightest celestial light dying, and they built a story around it that is arguably the most psychologically sophisticated myth to survive from the ancient world. That story is the 4,000-year-old narrative referenced in the title of this video. And it describes, with startling precision, what happens when you are stripped of everything you thought defined you. In Sumer, roughly 4,000 years ago, scribes pressed a narrative into clay tablets that scholars now call the Descent of Inanna. The myth dates to somewhere between 1900 and 3500 BCE, predating Homer by over 1,000 years. Inanna was the Sumerian queen of heaven and earth, goddess of love, war, fertility, and political power. She was also, explicitly, the planet Venus. The Sumerians did not separate the goddess from the astronomical object. Her story was the planet's story. In the myth, Inanna decides to descend to the underworld, the realm of the dead ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. Before she leaves, she adorns herself in the full regalia of her power, crown on her head, lapis lazuli beads around her neck, double strand of beads across her chest, breastplate over her heart, gold ring on her wrist, lapis measuring rod and line in her hand, royal robe draped over her body. She dresses as the most commanding being in heaven, which she is. She instructs her servant Ninshibor to seek help from the gods if she does not return within 3 days. And she begins the descent. The underworld has 7 gates. At the first gate, the gatekeeper stops Inanna and demands that she remove her crown before she may pass. Her authority lifts away. At the second gate, the lapis necklace is taken from her throat and her beauty goes with it. Gate after gate, the pattern holds. Each threshold demands another surrender. The beads across her chest, the breastplate over her heart, the gold bracelet on her wrist, each one pulled away, each one carrying a piece of who she believed herself to be. By the 6th gate, the lapis measuring rod and line are taken from her hand, stripping her of judgment, her ability to measure and order the world. At the 7th and final gate, the royal robe is pulled from her body. This is the last layer. Her social identity, the garment that tells the world who she is, the thing she has worn so long it feels like skin, gone. When Inanna protests, the gatekeeper delivers a line that has echoed through 4,000 years of commentary. Quiet, Inanna. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They may not be questioned. She arrives before Ereshkigal naked, bowed low, stripped of every marker of identity, status, power, and beauty she carried into the descent. The 7 judges of the underworld fix her with the gaze of death. She is killed. Her corpse is hung on a hook on the wall, and there she hangs for 3 days. Through the intervention of the god Enki, Inanna is brought back to life and begins her ascent. But the return is not free. The underworld demands a substitute. Someone must take her place. Inanna agrees and the demons follow her back to the surface to collect the replacement. What happens next is the part of the myth that most spiritual content never reaches, and it may be the most important part. Inanna returns to the world and begins visiting the people in her life. Her faithful servant Ninshubur is the first person she encounters, dressed in rags, weeping, mourning Inanna at the gate. Ninshubur had done exactly what Inanna asked. She had mourned. She had pleaded with the gods. She had fought for Inanna's return. When the demons suggest taking Ninshubur as the substitute, Inanna refuses. Ninshubur earned her survival through genuine devotion. Then Inanna arrives at her own throne. And there sits Dumuzi, her husband. He is not mourning. He is sitting on her throne, wearing fine garments, enjoying her power, having assumed her position without grief, without effort to rescue her, without apparent concern that she had been dead for 3 days. He filled the vacancy. He enjoyed the upgrade, and he did not look back. Inanna fixes him with the gaze of death. Dumuzi becomes the substitute. This is the final lesson of the descent. After you have been stripped of every external marker of value and returned knowing what is genuinely yours, you can see clearly who showed up and who simply occupied the space you left behind. Ninshubur valued the relationship. Dumuzi valued the position. The difference was invisible before the descent. It became unmistakable after. For anyone over 60, this distinction carries particular weight. Decades of accumulated relationships, professional alliances, and social circles inevitably contain both Ninshubur's and Dumuzi's. Retirement, health challenges, the loss of a spouse, the downsizing of a home, any significant life transition that removes the markers of status and productivity functions as a descent through the gates. And what emerges on the other side is exactly what Inanna discovered. Some people stay because they value you. Others stay because they valued your position, your usefulness, or the version of you that served their needs. The myth does not frame this discovery as betrayal or as cause for bitterness. It frames it as clarity. And clarity, however uncomfortable, is always better than the alternative. This is a values audit conducted at the level of identity, and it maps directly onto the astronomical event it was written to describe. Venus, the brightest light in the sky, descends, loses its visibility, vanishes entirely, re-emerges transformed from evening star to morning star. The goddess descends, loses everything she used to define herself, dies, and returns changed, seeing clearly for the first time who was real and who was performing. The Inanna myth is not an isolated text. The Akkadian version, featuring Ishtar, follows the same structure. The descent pattern, the stripping, the death and return, appears in Phoenician, Greek, and Roman mythology. Aphrodite and Persephone echo these themes across different cultures. The pattern recurs because Venus itself recurs, disappearing and reappearing in the sky on a rhythm so regular that every civilization in the Northern Hemisphere eventually built a narrative around it. And in every version, the core teaching holds. The descent is not punishment. It is clarification. That is Venus retrograde. That is the teaching. It is a values audit conducted at the level of identity, mapped directly onto the planet's disappearance and return. And it has been the teaching for 4,000 years. So how did this become, do not buy a new outfit during retrograde? Through a series of simplifications that each removed one layer of depth until nothing was left but the warning label. Professional astrologers working in the Hellenistic tradition understood Venus retrograde within the context of Venus's full synodic cycle, the complete 584-day journey from morning star to evening star and back again. They interpreted the retrograde as the descent phase, when values and attachments operating on autopilot came up for conscious reassessment. Medieval Arabic and Persian astrologers maintained this complexity. The Vedic tradition treated it similarly, as a time of intensified inner inquiry rather than external withdrawal. The first flattening happened when astrology moved from professional practice to newspaper columns in the 20th century. Venus equals love and money. Retrograde equals problems. Therefore, Venus retrograde equals love and money problems. Social media completed the reduction by rewarding anxiety over self-examination. A post advising you to audit your values generates no shares. A post telling you your ex is coming back generates thousands. The tradition that began with a goddess descending through 7 gates ended up as a dating column with celestial branding. In the Vedic tradition, Venus is called Shukra, and its retrograde is treated as a period when material pleasures and surface attractions lose their hold. The teaching says that during Venus retrograde, you will naturally find less satisfaction in the things that normally please you, and that the dissatisfaction itself carries useful information. If a relationship feels flat, the flatness is telling you something about the foundation underneath the attraction. The tradition treats the discomfort as diagnostic, not as something to medicate or avoid. But this October, Venus is not conducting that audit alone. On October 24th, 3 weeks after Venus stations retrograde, Mercury stations retrograde in the same sign, Scorpio, both planets appearing to reverse direction, moving backward through the same stretch of sky at the same time. That overlap lasts roughly 3 weeks, until both station direct in mid-November. Mercury retrograde carries its own ancient teaching, separate from but parallel to the Venus tradition. The Babylonian astronomers who first tracked Mercury's apparent reversals on cuneiform clay tablets did not treat them as disasters. They called them turnings and logged them alongside eclipses and lunar phases as part of a systematic map of celestial motion. The Greek word retrograde literally means backward step, and the astrological tradition that developed from those Babylonian observations treated Mercury's retrograde as a period of structured review. Reconsider, revisit, reconnect, reread. The re prefix was the entire framework. Deliberate re-examination of ground already covered, not avoidance or hiding. The technology panic version of Mercury retrograde is a modern invention, barely a few decades old, manufactured by social media's appetite for dramatic warnings. This matters because Mercury and Venus govern different layers of the same experience. Venus governs what you value. Mercury governs how you communicate about what you value. When Venus retrogrades alone, you reassess your attachments, your spending, your relationships, your sense of self-worth. When Mercury retrogrades alone, you revisit your recent communications, your agreements, your unsent messages, your unfinished conversations. When both retrograde at once, and especially when both retrograde through the same sign at the same time, the two audits merge into something more demanding than either one alone. You are reassessing what matters to you, while simultaneously reassessing how honestly you have been expressing it. The relationship you have been performing instead of living. The spending habit you have been justifying instead of examining. The version of yourself you have been presenting instead of inhabiting. All of these become harder to maintain when both the values planet and the communication planet are simultaneously asking you to look back and tell the truth. Subscribe if you want the next one. And the fact that both are retrograding through Scorpio amplifies this further. In traditional astrology, Scorpio is the sign that governs what is hidden, buried, and unspoken. It is associated with psychological depth, with the things people carry beneath the surface, with the truths that get locked away because they are too uncomfortable to examine in daylight. Scorpio does not allow comfortable half-truths to survive. Where other signs might let you get away with a surface-level audit, Scorpio pushes the examination into territory you have been actively avoiding. Consider what that means for both transits at once. Venus retrograde in Scorpio does not just ask, "What do you value?" It asks, "What do you value that you have never admitted to yourself?" Mercury retrograde in Scorpio does not just ask, "What have you left unsaid?" It asks, "What have you left unsaid?" because saying it would change everything you have built. The combination in this particular sign reaches into the places where values and communication have both been buried, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Having both planets retrograde through this sign simultaneously means the audit reaches into the parts of your life you have been avoiding, precisely because they are the parts that matter most. Now here is where the psychology meets the practice. Because whether or not these planetary transits carry any causal energy, the framework the ancients built around these cycles addresses something that modern life handles very poorly. Values rarely get examined on purpose. They get absorbed. You grow up in a family, a culture, an economic class, a generation, and you inherit a set of assumptions about what matters. Money matters, status matters, attractiveness matters, being liked matters. These assumptions layer onto you through decades of quiet reinforcement until they feel like your own values, like things you deliberately chose. But many of them were never chosen. They were absorbed, the way a child absorbs an accent without ever deciding to speak that way. Psychologists who study relationship satisfaction have documented what they call the 18-month cycle, a well-observed pattern in which the initial neurochemical high of a new relationship, driven by elevated dopamine and norepinephrine, naturally tapers off at roughly the 12 to 18-month mark. The infatuation chemistry fades, and what remains is either a genuine connection built on shared values or a realization that the attraction was running on fuel that has now burned off. This cycle operates independently of any planetary transit, but it aligns almost perfectly with the 18-month Venus cycle. Every time Venus retrogrades, a significant percentage of relationships are naturally reaching that inflection point where surface attraction meets deeper compatibility. Venus retrograde did not cause the reassessment. The reassessment was already happening. The retrograde gave it a name, and the reassessment intensifies when it arrives in Scorpio, because Scorpio-ruled territory includes the things that relationships are built on beneath the surface: trust, vulnerability, the willingness to be known fully rather than partially, shared finances and shared debts, both financial and emotional, the parts of a relationship that couples stop talking about once the initial openness of courtship settles into routine. A double retrograde through this sign brings those buried conversations to the surface whether you planned for them or not. The same principle applies to financial values. Behavioral economists have documented hedonic adaptation, the well-established finding that the pleasure derived from a new purchase or lifestyle upgrade fades to baseline within roughly 6 to 18 months. The car that thrilled you becomes just a car. The raise that felt transformative becomes the new normal. You do not notice the pleasure fading because it fades gradually, like the sky dimming at dusk. A Venus retrograde framework provides a recurring external prompt to check whether the things you are spending money on still bring genuine satisfaction, or whether you are maintaining spending patterns that outlive their purpose. That prompt, arriving every 18 months, is exactly frequent enough to catch the hedonic adaptation cycle before it calcifies into permanent, unexamined habit. And when Mercury joins that audit, it adds a layer that Venus alone does not reach. Mercury asks about the words, the conversations you should have had but avoided, the things you told yourself you meant but did not, the agreements you entered with your fingers crossed, the truths you swallowed because speaking them would have been inconvenient. Mercury retrograde, in the original Babylonian and Hellenistic traditions, was never about technology crashing. It was about reviewing what you have said, what you have agreed to, and what you left unsaid. Layer that on top of Venus's question, is this what I actually value? And the double retrograde becomes a comprehensive reckoning with the gap between what you carry inside and what you show the world. The practical framework for working with this double transit is straightforward. Start with the Venus layer. Do a values inventory, not a vision board or a gratitude list, but an honest accounting of where your time, energy, money, and attention actually go, and whether those allocations reflect what genuinely matters to you or what you inherited, assumed, or never questioned. Notice who in your life is Ninshabur, genuinely present and genuinely invested, and who might be Dumuzi, enjoying the position without earning the place. Notice where your spending runs on habit rather than genuine desire. Notice where your daily routine persists because you never stop to choose differently. Then add the Mercury layer. Review your recent communications with the people who matter most. Where have you been honest? Where have you been performing? Where is there a conversation that has been waiting to happen, circling in your mind for weeks or months, that you keep postponing because having it would change the shape of something you have been pretending is fine? That conversation is what Mercury retrograde in Scorpio is pointing at. The sign will not let you leave it buried, and look at how the two layers interact. Are the values you identified in the Venus audit the same values you are actually communicating to the people around you? Or is there a gap, possibly one that has been growing for years, between what you carry inside and what you express? That gap is the territory of this double retrograde. Venus finds what is real. Mercury asks whether you have said it out loud. Neither transit requires you to hide from life or put decisions on hold. Both require you to pay attention to what you have been carrying and whether you are ready to set it down or finally speak it. Here is the timeline. Venus stations retrograde on October 3rd. For 3 weeks, the values Audit operates alone. Then, on October 24th, Mercury stations retrograde in the same sign, and the communication Audit joins it. From late October through mid-November, both planets retrograde through Scorpio simultaneously, both station direct around November 13th and 14th. The intensity peaks during the overlap. If you begin paying attention when Venus stations retrograde at the start of October, you will have 3 weeks to identify the values questions before Mercury arrives and adds the communication questions on top. There is one final layer worth noting that draws on the Rose of Venus pattern. Because Venus returns to approximately the same position every 8 years, you can use the 8-year cycle as a personal reflection tool. Think back 8 years. Where were you? What did you value? What relationships were central to your life? What were you spending your money and time on? Now think back 16 years and run the same inventory. If you are in your 60s, you have lived through at least 7 complete turns of the rose. That is enough data to reveal the real pattern underneath all the surface changes. The values that survived every cycle because they are genuinely yours, and the ones that rose and fell because they belong to a particular season. The 8-year look back is structural analysis. It shows you what your values actually are, measured not by what you say you care about, but by what has survived multiple full turns of the rose. Venus stations retrograde on October 3rd. Mercury joins on October 24th, both in Scorpio, both asking you to look at what you have been carrying beneath the surface and decide whether it is time to finally bring it into the light. The Babylonian astronomers tracked both planets on clay tablets 26 centuries ago. The Sumerian scribes built a myth around Venus's disappearance that is still the best description of what it feels like to lose everything you thought defined you and discover what is actually yours. The Hellenistic astrologers understood the retrograde as a passage, not a problem. And the Vedic tradition taught that the discomfort of reassessment was information, not punishment. Inanna went down through 7 gates and came back knowing what was real and what was costume. That is the oldest version of this teaching, and after 4,000 years, it is still the best one. The gates are open this October. The only question is whether you walk through them with your eyes open or wait for the stripping to happen on its own. The next video is about angel numbers, the repeating sequences like 111, 222, and 333 that millions of people believe carry messages from the universe. One person created the entire system in 2005, then publicly renounced everything she had written and asked her publishers to pull the books from print. The numbers kept spreading without her. That video is on screen now.